Heljan have really captured that angular look of the prototype. This model was head and shoulders above anywhere that I've seen elsewhere. Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you up here to the loft on Weir Yard. I hope I find you well. Well, the weather has finally broken and we've gone from that really hot sunshine and the humidity here in the UK to, well, really torrential rainstorms and thunder. So during this video, if you do hear the patter of rain and the rumble of thunder, then that's what's going on, and there's not really a lot I can do about that, unfortunately. But what I can do is show you over the latest model to be received for review through the generosity of Heljan. And this is that AEC railcar that we've been waiting for. They finally arrived with their very angular and austere 1940s design. These are a model which I've been really looking forward to. I have experience of the Class 128 from Heljan, and that has been an exceptionally reliable model. So it'll be really interesting to see how this new model compares to that. But without further ado, how did it do? Well, come with me, and I'm looking forward to showing you. I'd like to thank Heljan for sending over very kindly for review one of their all-new AEC rail cars that they've produced in 00. They've not been out that long, but they are available in a number of different livery options and running numbers, and they've sent over the Great Western Railway version in the chocolate and cream, and I can already see through the window in the box that this is a really eye-catching livery. Now, the Great Western Railway were early adopters to the idea of making rail cars that ran using an internal combustion engine rather than steam. And I guess that they may well have been inspired by trains in mainland Europe, like the Flying Hamburger in Germany. And indeed, some of these rail cars weren't necessarily used just for local services on lightly used branch lines, but actually they ran some express services using them as well, and actually treated them almost as a miniature version of that Flying Hamburger train. This particular version that Heljan have sent over is number 19400, GWR Chocolate Cream Railcar number 22 with the monogram, and that's to do with the particular livery that it carries. We've also got a whole wealth of information on the end here, and it's nice to see manufacturers putting this on to really help the consumer decide in the shops whether this is the livery option that is suitable for them. So we've got Era 3, so that's Big 4 period, and it's got couplings in NEM pockets. The DCC decoder is 21 pin, and we're going to be looking at that a little bit later on. And of course, if it's got a 21 pin socket, it is indeed DCC ready, although I suspect that DCC fitted or sound fitted versions would obviously tell you something different there. We've got sprung buffers and also working lights, and actually looking at the data sheet for this, there are somewhere in the region of 9 different lighting options, so it'd be quite interesting to see just how well this copes with the decoder that I've chosen for today's DCC fitting guide. I've gone with a DCC Concepts Zen Black, and even though it's in the wrong box, so ignore that, this is a ZN218 decoder, which essentially means it's good for both 21 pin and 8 pin decoder socketed locomotives. So it's a very flexible one just to keep in stock on spec, just in case the next locomotive that you buy needs a DCC decoder, and this is of course much more likely to fit it. So if you were looking for the DCC fitting guide, stay tuned for towards the end of this video. The box itself is not quite as hard a box as we've seen from some of the other Heljan releases. We've got a thinner cardboard slipcase which opens to allow the inner workings of the box to just come out there, and we've got a cardboard outer and very tightly fitted in here blister pack with the model itself in place, and that is actually really tight in there. In fact, there we go. So we can also see we've got the paperwork underneath, and just a bit of a warning about the detail on this, and it's designed to run down to radius 2 curves, but I will be testing it down to radius 1 because quite often I do find that models might actually go round radius 1 even if the manufacturer says it won't. I mean, it might not look prototypically very pleasing, but it's always worth checking just how well it gets round. We've also got drive to all 4 axles, and that means that this will most likely be a sterling performer. Probably, in fact, certainly will be able to pull far more than the prototypes were ever tasked to. Looking inside, we've got a little bit of history about the railcar. The Great Western Railway, of course, built several different versions, and we have had one of the other designs come from another manufacturer that we have reviewed on this channel. And of course, despite its reputation for conservatism in locomotive design, the Great Western Railway was a pioneer in many areas of railway operation, and they had integrated air and bus services, and also finding really nice economical ways of operating loss-making branch lines, and they included things like the auto tanks. But as internal combustion engine technology developed, the GWR was also one of the pioneers of diesel railcar operation in Britain, introducing its first vehicle in December 1933, and over the next 4 years a further 17 streamlined railcars were built by Park Royal. They were numbers 1 to 4. Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon, number 5 to 18, and in a variety of forms for branch line, express and even parcels duties, number 17, which we reviewed a model of. In 1940 to 41, 15 standard rail cars, which were numbers 19 to 33, were built by the GWR at Swindon Works using 2 AEC engines and transmissions. They had some really angular bodywork compared to some of the earlier examples, in some ways a little bit more austere, but also in keeping with the aesthetics of the time. They were fitted with conventional buffers and draw gear, allowing them to haul limited trailing loads such as goods, parcel vans or even horse boxes, which made them a lot more useful and flexible than the earlier rail cars. They were of course displaced by BR's first generation DMUs, although 2 were actually rescued by preservations, W20W undergoing long-term restoration at the Kent and East Sussex Railway, and actually number 22, the prototype that this model is based on, is also preserved. It's really tightly fitted in this box and helped by these 2 foam blocks, which also really do protect the model quite a lot. So it's arrived here in absolutely perfect condition. I'm just going to try and get inside here. And it really does come well wrapped. And we've also got some extra detail here, plus the couplings just for going into the NEM sockets, and some extra, they look like drive shaft details too. Unwrapping the main locomotive, the first thing that does strike me is that compared to Heljan's earlier release of the Class 128 railcar, which I guess is a comparable model in some respects in terms of drive and performance, it is noticeably lighter, although of course without having the multitude of windows there is a lot more option in the Class 128 for extra body weight on the chassis. And of course this particular model comes with a fully detailed interior, which the lighting functions do allow this to all be lit up independently from some of the other lighting functions, and we are going to delve more into that. You can see immediately that there's a lot of angles on this. It really is a marked difference from the curvier examples that the GWR had to get commissioned to be built from various outside builders prior to taking the construction in-house with these. For me, they have captured the really angular front really well. They almost look homemade in some respects, with those flat panels just put together at angles, but with it comes a kind of aesthetic charm which I do quite like. The roof too, we don't have that curved tumble home. Instead, we've just got these angles along the side, which I guess help to keep the prototype within the loading gauge. It has to be remembered that these were built during the Second World War, where actually economies would always be taken to be able to get these out and onto the railway as quickly and cheaply as possible. And these rather slab-sided designs did mean that they could be easily built using possibly less skilled workforce, given that a great many of the men who'd been there from before the war would have been called up to go and fight in the Army, Navy and Air Force. And it also meant that these could be easily put together with much less wastage of materials, because it didn't have any complex shapes to form and all the little bits and pieces that would have gone into making that happen. The all-wheel drive, I can feel there, 1, 2, 3, 4. And actually, if we look underneath, we've got a really interesting drive shaft arrangement underneath the floor from a motor which appears to be contained within this central box. What this actually does mean is that we don't have any intrusion into the interior of the model. So we get a fully detailed interior that does actually also appear to be full height as well. So it doesn't look like you're going to have to perform surgery on any seated figures that you might choose to install in the interior. One thing I can see though is through these front windows in what appears to be the guards compartment, there is some visible electronics in there, and that looks like that might be where the 21-pin decoder socket is. We will investigate that further later in the review. It's just a shame really that we can see those electronics quite clearly through there, and in some respects some kind of dark shroud behind might have gone some way to just hide that a little bit. But I'm actually really happy that Heljan have kept the main body of the railcar free of any intrusions. You can see as well we've got lights on both ends, and the GWR monogram logo there in the centre is actually really nicely done, centred perfectly and wrapped round over that body line, which is again true to form with the prototype. The actual lining on this is really nicely done. I can't really see any issues with that lining. Again, it's a little bit more utilitarian than perhaps the GWR was used to, but with wartime conditions, that is to be expected. The lines on there are really straight and true, and we've got a little bit of drop shadowing on the numbering there, number 22, but not excessively so. The windows too are flush fitted, really nicely done. And then we've got the black line just above the cream, which demarks between the cream and that white roof. The white of the roof is actually really nice, and it's got a kind of a satin feel to it, so it's not matte, it's not gloss, and I think that Heljan have judged that just right. We've got torpedo vents on the roof. These look as though they may well be separately applied, and they do look quite fine. Up against the camera, it's also possible to see that really nice rivet detail, which has been captured perfectly. It's really crisp and clear and does look the part. The relief of it is not too great, and it feels like they've got it just right in terms of prototypical size. We've also got this extra vent on the roof with its kind of baffles around it, which would just stop the airflow from being rammed down into there. And I suspect that that could be something to do with perhaps a toilet, I don't know, something like that, or maybe just ventilation into the guard's area. Whatever it is, that is a real nice touch. They could have easily done that as just moulded on detail, but it looks to be separately applied, and it's really, really nice to see. The bogies on these are again very utilitarian, but captured perfectly by Heljan. We have the big springs on there, and the cutouts do seem to go all the way through. So we actually, despite the fact that it is quite austere and utilitarian, it does look exactly as per the prototype. They don't appear to be painted though, and we've got this slightly shiny black plastic, which from most viewing angles is not a great issue, but I think that this is an area where perhaps a quick weathering, blow over with an airbrush, or a dab with a brake dust coloured weathering powder would go a long way to really tone down that shine and improve the overall look of this model. We've got these really nice grills on the side here as well, and they feel like they're a separate wire mesh over a recess, and we get a really great 3D look to that. Above that in the middle, again, a really nice sharp GWR monogram, and everything about this is just nicely done. Looking to the other bogie, we can see there the drive shaft that the prototype had going between the different axles, and that is a separately applied piece and really nicely done. If we turn the model over again, the other bogie has that on the other side, and it's been correctly done. Really, really nice. Looking back to the underside, we've got a whole bank of little micro switches down here. The DC user is not forgotten, and what it means is that you can turn on and off any or all of those 9 lighting functions just by using these little dip switches. This is a great touch if you're going to be hauling a tail load, because it does mean that you can turn on or off the tail lights. We've also got a number of other functions for cab lights, other marker lights, interior cabin lights, and it'll be really interesting to see how well this operates on a 6-function decoder, given that we appear to have 9 different auxiliary functions, which is far more than I've ever seen on any other model. According to the instructions, the model has been configured by the factory to work with an ESU LockPilot or LockSound version 5 decoder, and that means that natively that decoder will support all of those functions. The buffers are fully sprung with a turned metal head and are actually really nice and firmly in place, so there's no risk of those coming out when not wanted to. The buffer beam detail is fully applied at both ends, so there is nothing for the end consumer to need to fit if you want to have this running around with, just itself with no tail load. That 3-link coupling is actually really, really nice, and it's made of metal and really, really strong, and I suspect that it is fully usable for its intended purpose. Looking further down back to the bogies, we've got that coupling pocket there for the included couplings if you wish to pull a tail load, and as the information sheet that comes with it specified, they were often used to pull a van or indeed even horse boxes. On the underside of the bogies, we've got brake blocks and really nice fine wire sanding pipes which all do line up with the faces of the wheels. We've got all-wheel pickup to add to that all-wheel drive, although on this example there does seem to be an excess of white grease, and you can see the shine there on the underside of the gear towers does seem to indicate that there is slightly too much lubricant on that end of the model, but it's not a huge issue, and it is quite easily possible to remove those plates off the bottom of the bogie towers and just clean out any excess. In all honesty, I'd rather have slightly too much than too little. The other end of this model does seem to be just right. When it comes to running on DC, this model performed really smoothly and without fault straight out of the box. I had it on the DCC Concepts rolling roads, and running both forwards and backwards, it was a really smooth and steady pickup with a very prototypical top speed, and at no point did it feel notchy, nor did it have any issues with suddenly stopping or suddenly starting, and overall its performance on DC was really, really good. The front and rear lights work as they should, and what's noticed with all those dip switches at the bottom set to the default position, the interior lights all come on and gain in brightness as the power on the controller is brought up. But it's perfectly possible to change that if you want to by turning various bits of the lighting off. If you look at the manual that comes with this, it tells you which switch does what. And I think that this is a really good feature. So we come now to the DCC fitting, and I'm going to use a DCC Concepts ZN218 decoder. To get inside the model, according to the instructions, we're going to need a screwdriver, and we're just looking for these two screws, one there and one there, and the corresponding two screws there and there. I actually found that my smallest Phillips style screwdriver was still too big to fit into those. So I've had to go to my smallest screwdriver in the set, which whilst a flathead does seem to work just fine in these screws. Be very careful because you don't want to break the heads, because that's going to make them impossible to get in or indeed get out next time. Loosen each of the 4 screws in turn. You'll feel them come all the way out. Turn the model around. We're going to just repeat that at the other end. I'm just going to pull them free just to make sure that there's nothing left to jam on the inside. I'm just going to gently just work that loose. What I'm actually doing is I'm holding the model by the underside of these battery boxes and just banging my knuckles on the wood, not the model itself, just to lightly shock it to bring the inside free. The body slips neatly away and we can put that to one side. Inside the model, you can see there we've got a nice detailed interior including all of the internal partitions. We've got that lighting bar along the top of the rail car, and then we've got our representation of the cab's front and back. Our blanking plate is here, just on this board. It's a little bit difficult to access because of the wiring that comes down from the lighting bar. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use a flathead screwdriver to very gently prise that up, and I'm going to work at that from both sides. Just gently ease it a little bit at a time because you don't want to break those pins or bend them. And as it comes up, it's a little bit easier just to work this screwdriver in, ease it up, turn it back round. It is a little bit of a difficult access, but it's not impossible. Blanking plate is really quite tightly in there, it has to be said. It's trapped underneath those wires, but there, we've just got that out. Put that to one side, and then we're going to get out that ZN218 decoder. Now we don't need the wiring loom that comes with this, so just gently wiggle that out, put it to one side, and then we're just going to make sure that we match up the pins. We're just going to put this back in very carefully, just fit that back over the pins. Again, make sure that you line those pins up. Do not force it. If you find yourself forcing it, it's because it's not lined up as it's supposed to be. Once we've got that seated, it's just a case of finding somewhere to just tuck in the solder-free fly lead for the stay alive, just so we make sure that firstly we don't want this to jam underneath the bodywork when we're putting it back in, but I also want to make sure that it doesn't run the risk of just appearing right behind the glass of one of the windows. And there we've got it in place. When it comes to replacing the body, make sure you get it back on the correct way round. The guard's compartment corresponds with where the electronics are. Gently slip that over. Make sure we've got no trailing wires from that stay alive lead to jam into place. And then we'll just push and you'll feel it click. And then it's a case of getting those screws back in. Once that's all in place, we are now fully DCC fitted, and we can take that to the programming track, test it, make sure, add in the running number that we want. In this case I'm going to go for number 22, and then let's get it on the track and see how well it performs. On the track, when it comes to lighting functions, something a little bit unusual is going on with this model. When I turn the headlights on, the F0 function, we do get the headlights there at one end of the unit, but when I change the direction, we don't get the red marker lights. If I go to the other end of this unit, you can see the marker lights are on, but again, no red tail lights when I change direction. This seems extremely unusual, especially given the fact that there are switches underneath which could have been used to just very simply turn the red marker lights off. When we look to other functions, so I press here F1, we get the top marker light. Press F1 again and that goes off. Looking back to the other end, and if we press F2 and again, you can see again that top marker light goes on and off. But when we go to F3, F4, F5, that should be the full 6 outputs of the Zen Black decoder. None of those powered outputs appear to be doing anything. It is a bit of a shame because this isn't compatible with most brands of DCC decoders that have standard NMRA powered outputs. Even a 4 powered output and 2 logic output decoder, which are available on the market from some manufacturers, would not control all the lighting functions, and it does seem to be a little bit of a strange choice to go for a ESU lock sound to the exclusion of pretty much all other brands of decoders in order to use all those lighting functions. My thoughts are that not enough is being made of that bank of dip switches underneath. They seem really to only be of value to DC users, and it's a shame, especially as we're not getting those red marker lights which I would have expected from every brand of decoder. I've been experimenting with lots of different DCC decoders, and I've actually found one here which is fairly easy to get hold of, which whilst it won't activate all of the lighting functions, it activates most of them. So you can see here I've turned on all of the front lights, the rear marker light for this end, the top light, and then if I move this along I can show you the other end where we've got again the front lights, the rear marker light and the top light. So 6 different functions are all working, and this is off the Trainomatic 21-pin decoder. When we apply the power, the pickup is reasonably smooth. It does run really well, and just remember this hasn't had extensive running on DC first, so this very much is out of the box performance. Changing the direction, the unit picks up speed very easily, and there is good grip and smoothness even as it goes up a 5% grade. No hint of wheel slip. Performance itself from this motor drivetrain combination is really good. Even at low speed running, there's no stuttering and really no need to even consider having to add a stay alive. The running quality from this railcar was incredibly good. It had a really smooth pick up and slow down, and the top speed was not excessive, and that meant when you were driving it that it really did feel prototypically accurate and not too high geared at all. At a pleasing level of control, and overall it was a pleasure to run this on Weir Yard. The all-wheel pickup and the all-wheel drive meant that it was very sure-footed. Even up those 5% grades, there was no struggle whatsoever, and I've got every faith that this would be able to haul actually quite a large tail load, far more than the prototype would ever have been called upon to do. It wouldn't go round the radius 1 curves when I tried it, but actually that doesn't matter. I think the compromises that would have had to have been made to it to make it go round that really weren't worth taking, and I'm glad that Heljan didn't. Overall, really pleased with the running performance of this model, and there's not really much to fault. So we turn now to the scores. First up is build quality, and I have to say that by and large I was very pleased with what I saw with this. The entire body, including those buffers, and even the buffer beam detail, was very robust. I didn't have any detail fall off on the outside. However, it must be said that during the course of using this railcar, I became aware that one of the internal seats had come loose. On closer inspection, it actually wasn't held in place with any glue whatsoever and was just a push fit. Being that it's on the inside of the railcar, it did mean that if I didn't glue this back in, then it was going to continually come loose, and I just felt that maybe a little dab of glue on those spigots would have helped in this area. So overall, I'm going to give this a 9.0 out of 10. Running quality was really good. As outlined in the review, there really wasn't anything much to faze this, and it handled pretty much everything that was thrown at it. It wouldn't make it round the radius 1 curves, but that didn't really matter. One thing I did find though was that the battery boxes were a little bit prone to grounding out on any area of ballast that was maybe just a tad too high. This is something which I have seen other items of rolling stock and locomotives get fouled on this before, but they're very much in a minority. So overall, I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10. When it came to Dcc Fitting and Innovation, this was really the only area where the model I felt had not quite lived up to expectations. Getting the body itself off was actually reasonably easy. It wasn't too tightly on and there were no hidden clips, which are a bit of a pet hate of mine. Once we got inside, it was somewhat tricky to get the blanking plate out because of the nature of the wires that go up to the lighting bar in the roof of the railcar. Once I'd got that blanking plate out, there was a similar struggle to get the decoder into its place and pushed down home. Once it was all back together, that's where I really did feel a little bit of disappointment. The decoder that I used for the Dcc fitting complies with the NMRA standard for a 6-function decoder. Nonetheless, this model didn't use some of those functions. It appears that it was expecting a logic level output rather than a full auxiliary output that powers the lights. The dip switches on the underside are great if you're running this on DC. Nonetheless, for the DCC decoders, I could not find a combination of buttons that allowed those red taillights to display. And this, for me, is going to leave users of a multitude of brands of DCC decoders a little bit disappointed. I'm afraid this gets a 6.5. When it came to accuracy, this model was head and shoulders above anywhere that I've seen elsewhere. There really wasn't anything out of place, and Heljan have really captured that angular look of the prototype. I really like the way that the front faces have that austere, flat look, and all the angles are where they should be. This very much does look like an accurate model of the prototype, and I'm going to give it a 9.9. Finally, we come to value for money. I've been looking around and these are actually quite an expensive model, but you do get a lot for that. However, the average user is going to find disappointment with some of the lighting functions, and that left me feeling that the price tag that I found these at, it just seems a little bit expensive when the average user just can't use most of those lighting functions. So overall, I'm still going to give it a good healthy 8.9 out of 10. And that brings our final score to a very respectable 43.8 out of 50. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that video and found it informative too. Don't forget that we've got an affiliate link in the description box down below, which takes you through to Rails of Sheffield, where you can pick up your own version of this fine model. Also, don't forget to check out the merchandise as well. It's a great way to pick up your Jenny Monday Club t-shirts, die-cut stickers, hoodies, but also we've got that Jenny Monday Club wagon and, of course, my books as well. You can also check us out over on Patreon and help us to make the videos that you want to see on this channel. So did you agree with what I thought about the model today? Have you actually found the DCC fitting easier than I did? And have you got all those lighting functions to work? Whatever your thoughts, I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below. And I do read every single one of your comments. Also, I'd love to hear from you suggestions of what I should be doing for future videos as well. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying, you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N. from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Graham Foster, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, and Alan Dickerson. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.